on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, one of Australian sport's biggest stars charged over the alleged racially aggravated harassment of a police officer. Caroline Marcus will join me shortly with all the details. Plus, she has an exclusive story of Jewish comics having their Australian shows cancelled over the Palestinian conflict. Also tonight, we have Josh Hammer, Alex Stein and Dr. Pink. And plenty of lefties losing it, including President Joe Biden, again mixing up countries. This time he thinks Ukraine is in the Middle East.
Airdrops of additional food and supplies into Ukraine and seek to continue to open up other avenues into Ukraine, including the possibility of a Marine corridor.
Countries, regions, he just mixes it all up. He kept saying Ukraine, he meant Gaza. Anyway, we've got plenty to cover, so let's jump right into it now with senior reporter Caroline Marcus. Caroline, let's start with the Matildas captain Sam Kerr being charged with racially aggravated harassment of a police officer in London. She's going to be facing a 4-day criminal trial next year. She appeared at Kingston Crown Court on Monday via video link. She's pled not guilty to all these charges, which were alleged to have taken place back in January 2023. What more can you tell us about this case?
Well, this is a fascinating case, Rita, because most of the country woke up to this news this morning, had never heard of these reports previously, but this incident had apparently happened last year, allegedly when Sam Kerr had taken a taxi ride, and there was some argument over the taxi fare, and police were called for some reason to do with that alleged argument, and it was during that confrontation with police that Sam Kerr is alleged to have engaged in this aggravated racial harassment. Now, she is going to defend these charges. She has pleaded not guilty. What we do know is that the incident is alleged to have taken place in the early hours of the morning, shortly after the Chelsea striker, because she is also a striker for the British team, had scored a hat-trick in the FA Cup. So there has been some speculation she may have been out celebrating when this incident occurred. Now, she has just appeared very briefly in court overnight in the UK to enter that not guilty plea. It has been reported that she plans to base her defence around the idea that she didn't intend to cause any harm or distress to the police officer and that there was no racial element to it. In order to prove this charge over there, you have to be able to prove that there had been an intention to cause this distress, or that the distress and alarm had actually been caused. You need to show evidence of that. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out, but it has come as a shock, not just to the public, but to her bosses at Football Australia, who had no idea about this either until they saw the news themselves this morning. So they are not going to be too happy with their star player either, and she is facing a maximum 6 months jail for this offence as well, Rita. So very serious charge here.
That is serious. And I did see today Mark Bosnich came out and said the soccer authorities in the country need to be transparent about what's happening. They've got to share what they know about this case. She's, of course, innocent unless she's proven guilty, but there is so much interest. And you're right, fans were blindsided after having the World Cup last year here and unprecedented backing of the Matildas. To hear about this was quite a shock. Now, I want to ask you about your exclusive today, a remarkable story about Jewish comedians saying they are victims of anti-Semitism after an Australian theatre chain cancelled their shows in Melbourne and Sydney. They say this is going to cost them around $100,000 in ticket sales. And remarkably, Caroline, this is over the conflict in Gaza. I mean, what do these comedians have to do with that?
Well, they are Israeli comedians. They're two of the biggest comedians from Israel. In fact, Rita, they have huge followings, both of them. They're pretty funny guys if you actually check out their comedy. And I had the pleasure of interviewing them yesterday and hearing the famous Jewish humour from them directly. They can still laugh about all of this, but it has left them also feeling what they say sad and embarrassed over what has happened here. Essentially, it's a cancel culture mixed with what's happening in the conflict and the response, the local response to that here as well. So they had these long-held bookings with a chain of theatres in Australia, Palace Cinemas. It owns Chevelle Cinema in Sydney and Astor Theatre in Melbourne. And these two comedians had these bookings for a year. They were due to originally perform their shows in October, but they, of course, got rescheduled after the October 7 attacks in their home country. And then they were due to perform there this month at the moment. But a few weeks ago, they got an email from Palace Cinemas saying that they were reviewing their booking in light of some of the content that they became aware of that the pair had been posting, in particular a cartoon that features one of them shooting the other one out of a cannon with the Israeli flag on it. And the cinema chain also said that they were concerned about security, even though the organisers say that they had had no threats from protesters and no reports as they're far aware that protesters was planning any action. In fact, they had funded their own top-notch security team to come to the theatres to help provide extra security, because that's what you need to have these days if you're Jewish. And so they don't understand this thinking at all. And the cinema chain went on to cancel their booking a few days later. Now, the comedians say that this is classic anti-Semitism. The theatres say that they don't think there's a space at the moment to be making jokes about the conflict. But I think you'll find
that's just ridiculous, Caroline.
Do.
You can't have venues dictating or policing the content of a comic set. I mean, that's not their job. And to be preempting troubles that, from what you say, haven't actually happened. I mean, who knows? Maybe when the actual shows were on, there would have been protesters or there would have been threats. But then you don't empower that mob or that lobby by giving into them, preempting what they're going to do in this case. I just think it's absolutely shocking. Comedy, as long as it's funny, you should be able to cover any territory you want, any material, as long as you're actually funny. Now, let's talk about a story that had Melburnians very angry this morning. There was gridlock on Melbourne's Westgate Bridge, spanning some 25 kilometres at some points, after a group of climate activists allegedly used a rental truck to block 3 lanes of traffic before climbing on top of the truck, allegedly, and unfurling a banner demanding a climate emergency be declared. The protesters have now been charged, but I've got to say, Caroline, the length of time it took for this matter to be addressed. We're talking about peak hour traffic. So many people inconvenienced. You know, people missed medical appointments, were late for jobs, maybe missed job appointments. The stress and inconvenience that would cause to so many people, and some of that could have been alleviated if police would clear that blockage a little bit quicker.
Not quite sure why it takes so long. I mean, police have said that they only closed 1 or 2 lanes of traffic, but in the end it was 4 out of 5 city-bound lanes, from what I've read, that were closed, and it did cause significant traffic delays for 3 hours. So you're right, that would have had a huge impact on people going to school, to jobs, huge inconvenience for people. I mean, the mind boggles when you consider the tactics of these climate extremists, because they're always putting the majority of people offside. They're not getting anyone, they're not swaying people to their cause. Sure, they're getting a few minutes of airtime or some column inches, but ultimately they're essentially pissing off the majority of people with this strategy. I don't know why they can't be moved on quicker. One of the people who's been arrested is a woman who's previously served time and was sentenced here in Sydney after causing similar obstructions on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So she certainly has form. I mean, these are obviously still allegations while these people are facing charges of these fresh allegations. But she was the first person charged in this state under our new protest laws with what she had done on the Harbour Bridge. And she was sentenced to 15 months in jail, but only ended up serving 4 months of that before her sentence is overturned, and now is facing what sounds like very similar charges. And I know she was also appearing to wear a keffiyeh in some of those images as well, that same woman. So make of that what you will, but certainly I think the right term for these people are very useful idiots.
Now, another video has emerged of teenage girls, young girls, viciously beating up a vulnerable victim in a gang attack. This time, an autistic 14-year-old is the victim here. She was punched on the head more than 50 times during this attack on Altona Pier in Melbourne, a beachside suburb of Melbourne, Altona. No arrests have been made so far, and this attack only stopped, Caroline, when a passerby intervened. Have a look.
Blow after sickening blow. Year 9 student Dakota cowers as she's subjected to a brutal bashing.
When I seen my daughter's face, I was beside myself.
The 14-year-old who lives with autism was walking along Altona Pier with a friend on Wednesday afternoon when she was set upon by a group of 5 teenage girls.
They thought it was funny.
The footage, too confronting to play in full, shows Dakota being punched, her hair pulled and an energy drink poured on her head.
The paramedic counted how many times my daughter had a blow to the head, and it was over 55. She could have been killed.
The attack only came to an end when a man intervened.
It's enough, man. She's little, yeah?
Caroline, it was 5 against 1. That poor girl is now too scared to leave her home.
It's so distressing to see this kind of footage. And I mean, look, everyone has a phone these days, but the offenders in this case allegedly filmed this themselves and posted the content online and sent it to the victim's sister. So they seem to be proud of what they were doing. At least that's the impression that you get from their alleged actions here. It is really distressing, the victim having autism and so young. The offenders potentially very young themselves. Police have said that they are known to the victim, and at this stage, when we're recording this, that we're filming this, there's have been no charges as yet, but that remains to be seen. I'm not sure what more evidence the police need, but no doubt they're conducting their inquiries as we speak.
Now, I want to bring you some footage out of New Zealand. Now, this is a shocking case. We covered it at the time, and now it's been before the courts. A pensioner from Auckland who waited nearly a full year to confront a trans activist who punched her repeatedly in the head at a pro-women's rally hosted by Kelly J. Keane. This is the Let Women Speak tour. At the Auckland District Court yesterday, the accused was discharged without conviction, granted permanent name suppression, and ordered to pay just $1,000 to his victim, Judith Hobson. Judith has called it an absolute joke. She also said, "I am absolutely livid that he has walked out of the court with, in my opinion, virtually no consequences whatsoever. It's no wonder victims don't go to court, because they become victims all over again." The Free Speech Union is talking about appealing this judgment, but we saw just wild scenes in Auckland and Melbourne during this Let Women Speak tour, Caroline Marcus, and to see someone who would punch a woman in the head, an elderly woman in the head, walk away with nothing more than a small fine seems very wrong indeed.
It does. I mean, it's a horrendous case. She was punched repeatedly in the head, left with horrific injuries. She says she still can't sleep at night. She struggles in her daily life. She felt scared to go home for a long time because her face had been shown and the offender would know what she looked like. I mean, to this woman's credit, this victim's credit, she has chosen to have her name and identity put out there in contrast with this offender, this thug, 20-year-old man at the time, who has successfully had his name suppressed so he can hide behind that suppression order for life, even though he went to a peaceful protest and attacked an elderly woman. And she's right that he essentially got a slap on the wrist for it. He was ordered to pay her $1,000 in compensation, which did not even cover her costs of getting herself, her airfares to court to attend the hearing. It's a joke, but this is the criminal system, and this is often how women are treated when they want to speak out for biological women's sex-based rights. They're treated almost like they are the offenders.
Caroline Marcus, thank you so much for your time this evening. Appreciate it. Joining me now is the senior editor-at-large at Newsweek and host of the Josh Hammer Show, Josh Hammer. Josh, let's start with Donald Trump. He's scored a huge unanimous win in the Supreme Court just a day before Super Tuesday, where voters in 15 states will decide who should be the Republican candidate for US president. This win was expected, Josh, but are you surprised it was unanimous? Even the most left-leaning justices back Trump being back on the ballot.
You know, Rita, this was an extraordinary oral argument at the Supreme Court. It was just under a month ago, February 8th, I believe, was the date. Trump was blessed to have an extraordinarily talented attorney argue this case for him at the U.S. Supreme Court. Jonathan Mitchell, longtime friend of mine, former Solicitor General of Texas, one of American conservatism's greatest legal intellects. In a just world, Jonathan Mitchell would be a federal judge at minimum, ideally the U.S. Attorney General. So he had a very good lawyer on this case. And the oral argument was really extraordinary, not just for Jonathan's lawyering capabilities, but the fact that even the liberal justices, specifically Ketanji Brown Jackson and Elena Kagan, two of the three more liberal justices on the court, they were very skeptical of Colorado's case here. So the only question really all along for court watchers such as myself was whether Sonia Sotomayor would try to reassure her #resistance friends in the MSNBC far left crowd and issue a solo fiery dissent or something along those lines. So for the past few weeks, Rita, my line has been this case is going to be 8-1 or 9-0. So to answer your question, no, I was actually not shocked. I was mildly surprised because I very rarely predict optimistic things when it comes to the American judiciary in general. So to actually have a good outcome is definitely mildly surprising. The three liberal justices did issue a somewhat abstruse concurrence in the judgment, but I read it and it wasn't really obvious to me what exactly they were complaining about. It seems to me like they felt some sort of need just to write something else to try to kind of wink, bat signal a little bit to their liberal fans all out there that they're not really as bad as Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito. But they were really quibbling. It wasn't a very substantive writing. So overall, fantastic day. I mean, absolutely fantastic day at the United States Supreme Court. They have said that Donald Trump cannot be removed from the ballot box. And ultimately, Rita, it is an affirmation of lowercase r Republican self-governance and the very notion that is rooted in America's constitutional preamble that it is we, the people, who decide our own destiny still in this country. For the most part, Jack Smith and his merry band of prosecutors are doing their darndest to try to change that when it comes to the sprawling lawfare apparatus and all the criminal prosecutions. But for now, this is a big win. And if Democrats want to beat Donald Trump and Republicans, they're going to have to do it at the ballot box, not via this ballot access removal gambit.
Well, the Democrat meltdown has been predictable, and frankly, some of it is a little bit sinister. Listen here to Democrat Jamie Raskin say he and fellow party members are still going to try to force Trump off the ballot.
I am working with a number of my colleagues, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Eric Swalwell, to revive legislation that we had to set up a process by which we could determine that someone who committed insurrection is disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And the House of Representatives already impeached Donald Trump for participating in insurrection by inciting it. So the House has already pronounced upon that.
And lefty journalists are also losing it over the court's decision. I could bring you a million examples, but Keith Olbermann is really beclowned himself. He tweeted this unhinged rant. He said, "The Supreme Court has betrayed democracy. Its members, including Jackson, Kagan and Sotomayor, have proved themselves inept at reading comprehension, and collectively the court has shown itself to be corrupt and illegitimate. It must be dissolved." Not a overreaction there at all, Josh, but some on the left cannot cope with reality. They cannot cope with this craziness from Colorado. Was never going to stand up to any level of scrutiny.
Yeah, I think my favorite reactions today, Rita, are those who are flipping out at the liberal justices, who are flipping out at Sonia Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown Jackson. I mean, newsflash, if you are condemning Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson for being too reactionary, far right wing, you probably need to go see a psychiatrist. I am not a psychiatrist by training, but there's probably something going on there between your ears inside the old noggin that suggests that you really need a reality check, frankly. And Keith Olbermann, I mean, look, he's calling Elena Kagan and Sotomayor out for reading comprehension. Rita, if I were to give you one data point each for Elena Kagan and Keith Olbermann, and by the way, not every day that I defend Elena Kagan here, but if I had to give you just one data point for these two individuals, Elena Kagan, former dean of Harvard Law School, Keith Olbermann, former ESPN sports anchor who was best known for laughing himself silly in a sports camera, who has better reading comprehension here? I mean, just give me a break. It defies reality. Unfortunately, it's actually not just liberals who have beclowned themselves. There are many in kind of the never Trump, anti-Trump, controlled opposition right who have done so as well.
Now, journalist Michael Schellenberger is uncovering the pseudoscientific surgical and hormonal experiments on children, adolescents and vulnerable adults. And he's exposing how the practice of transgender medicine is neither scientific nor medical. He's released a bunch of data on that, on the investigations he's undertaken. And he also released this video. Here are some doctors discussing patients who have regrets due to the surgeries they've undertaken, gender surgeries. These surgeries can leave them infertile. And here they discuss how pet dogs aren't enough. These people want to have children.
I think now that I follow a lot of kids into their mid-20s, I'm always like, oh, the dog isn't doing it for you, right? Yeah, they're like, no, I just found this, wonderful partner and now we're kids and da-da-da. So I think, it doesn't surprise me.
To call that callous, I think, is an understatement. This is just a reality of what these poor kids can go through. As confused teenagers, they can have surgeries performed on them and medical interventions that leave them infertile. If they're girls, they may have their healthy breasts removed. So even if they can have children, they can't breastfeed. And the way these doctors are discussing it, and I know it's a short clip, you just feel there's a callousness to it.
America is an interesting place politically, Rita, because there are some so-called social issues where America is decidedly more conservative than most of our peer countries, you might say, in the Anglosphere around the world. Abortion is one issue that comes to mind, maybe gay marriage, though that's basically a dead issue here at this point. But there are any number of other issues where America is still the wild, wild west of essentially no regulation whatsoever. And the transgender issue is one of them. Fertility clinics also probably fall into that category as well. But America is grossly, grossly unregulated when it comes to the transgender issue, even compared to countries in Europe, the UK, France, Sweden. So many of these countries are really starting to crack down on transgender so-called surgeries, even for minors. And as an American, I'm waiting, how many more exposés like what Michael Schellenberger has shown here? There was a huge whistleblower story about a year ago. Barry Weiss's Substack broke it. It was out in St. Louis at Washington University in St. Louis. Just a whistleblower who used to work there came clean with a tell-all story. Horrific, galling stuff. Kids that are sterilized are never going to be the same. They're never going to have children. These are vulnerable, young 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids. And they are just being preyed upon by the depredations of the medical lobby, these hospitals, these quote unquote surgeons. It's really Dr. Strangelove is what they are. They are profiting off of all of this. Big Pharma is profiting all of this. The hospital associations are profiting. A lot of people, Rita, stand to profit immensely off of the vulnerabilities of these children who are being warped on TikTok and Instagram and into telling them that they are something that they are not. This is going to go down. I really do fear this. 20, 30, 40 years from now, God willing, it'll be a lot sooner than that. But at some point, this is going to go down as one of the greatest medical scandals in human history. I genuinely think that it is a scandal.
I absolutely agree, Josh. I think we're going to see class action lawsuits like we've never seen before. And I don't think it's a profit incentive. I don't think they're doing it to profit. I think it's really ideological capture where they believe this is the right thing to do. Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time this evening. And still to come after the break, Lefties losing it and Alex Stein on American journalists being harassed and even arrested by the FBI. That's after this. Welcome back. It's time for Lefties Losing It. And let's start with the leader of the free world, President Joe Biden, who is again mixing up countries, regions, days. Here he keeps calling Gaza Ukraine.
In the coming days, we're going to join with our friends in Jordan and others in providing airdrops of additional food and supplies into Ukraine and seek to continue to open up other avenues into Ukraine, including the possibility of a marine corridor.
He's just not all there. And now let's go to two unhinged lefty women losing it at Glasgow Museum and doing this to a bust of Queen Victoria.
Dragged back to the Victorian era. Diseases and starvation such as rickets and scurvy are on the rise. Freedom begins with breakfast. If you can't understand that, we'll shove it in your face. Food is a human right. We call it a systems of oppression under which we are suffering.
Just brave and stunning work there from the climate catastrophists who do nothing but spew crazy lies and try to destroy beautiful things. That was porridge and jam, by the way, they poured over the statue. Now let's check Lefties in the wild. Watch these two horrid types harass a poor guy in a wheelchair of sorts because apparently it's against the rules. You won't believe this.
Nice job.
You're not supposed to have e-bikes on this thing.
This is a handicap piece of equipment.
And
what?
Show me the rules saying that you're allowed to do this.
You're serious? Who are you?
Come on, buddy. You're breaking the rules at the park.
It's a handicap piece of equipment. I can't walk.
You should have led with that.
He did lead with that.
I said it. Is this your husband? Class act, brother. You're a class act.
You guys are a class act. You know the rules.
Class act.
I mean, you're to be there, bro.
God, dude.
Can you believe the woman? She said, you should have led with that. I mean, really? Oh, my gosh. Now, let's go to how NBC edited a post-match interview with CJ Stroud, a quarterback for the Houston Texans. See if you can work out the bit NBC edited out when this aired. Here's the unedited version.
Your first NFL season and a record-setting performance for you. What does this moment mean?
First and foremost, I just want to give all glory and praise to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I mean, it's been amazing being in this city for as short as I've been, but the love that I've got I've really just been doing it for Houston, man. People back home, I'm blessed enough being in the position I am.
And this is the version that was replayed again and again.
CJ, your first playoff game in your first NFL season and a record-setting performance for you. What does this moment mean?
I mean, it's been amazing being in this city for as short as I've been, but the love that I've got, I've really just been doing it for Houston, man. People back home, I'm blessed enough being in the position I am.
Yes, I wonder what that little bit was cut. Now, only lefties losing it don't appreciate that men and women are different. That's why there are different categories in sport. But some men who identify as women and have the nerve to compete in women's sport, where they have a massive unfair advantage, then have the added nerve of mocking women who are not as strong as they are. Check out this weightlifter who is dominating in the women's competition.
Welcome to And Says Something Controversial. Why is women's bench so bad? I mean, not compared to me. We all know that I'm a tranny freak, so that doesn't count. And no, we're not talking about Mackenzie Lee. She's got little T-Rex arms and she's like 400 pounds of chest muscle, apparently. I mean, standard bench in powerlifting competition for women, I literally don't understand why it's so bad. My son, he weighs 45 pounds. His max bench is like 33. I'm legit seeing some women in competition who are doing something like 50 pounds, and I just don't understand it.
The things I could say, I'm almost thinking he's having a laugh there. That's not serious, but I'll just limit it to this. Mediocre male athletes who have no chance in the men's competition should not be taking opportunities from female athletes. Now let's go to the UFC and watch how Dana White, the boss there, handles this lefty losing it journo.
I just want to go back. You were talking about, like, you obviously give a long leash to your fighters about, you know, what they can say when they are up there with the UFC microphone, and you are getting into territory of homophobia, transphobia. Like, is there...
I don't give anybody a leash.
Well, I'm saying you...
A leash?
I'm like...
Free speech. Control what people say. Going to tell people what to believe. Going to tell people... I don't tell any other human being what to say, what to think, and there's no leashes on any of them. What is your question?
I was asking that question. I'll move on, though.
Yeah, probably a good idea. That's ridiculous.
He shut that down beautifully. Let's finish the segment with a Rick Riley endorsement via our Washington correspondent Annalise Nielsen.
I am Rick Riley from the flatlands of Colorado in Yuma, and I love Sky News. You guys rock. It's sad that we have to go to Australia to get real news in America, but I love Lefties losing it. I love that. So you guys are amazing. Keep up the good work, Sky News.
And we love him. Now, joining me is a host of Prime Time with Alex Stein. Alex Stein, your show is affiliated with Blaze Media, and one of your investigative journalists at Blaze, Steve Baker, he's been taken into FBI custody over his reporting of the Capitol Hill riots on January 6. This is just astonishing behaviour from the FBI. Tell me about this. What charges, if any, he's facing, and what he's alleged to have done wrong.
Well, Steve Baker's a journalist, and he's based here in Dallas. And the reason why it's such a big deal is because there's a lot of journalists that walked around there that aren't being charged. But one of the reasons that Steve believes and I believe is that he's being targeted because he's exposed a lot of the narratives that the January 6th committee that has tried to create. You know, they've tried to make it out to be like, you know, the worst thing since 9/11. But Steve and his reporting has really exposed a lot of that with all the footage that has come out. So the fact that they're charging him, you know, over 3 years later, it really just shows you it's an injustice. And listen, I'll be honest, and I think Steve would agree and I would agree. They'll call us conspiracy theorists, but Donald Trump won every single state, all 50 states, even the most liberal states, when it came to in-person voting. Joe Biden won all 50 states, even the most conservative ones, when it came to mail-in ballots. So whether I'm a conspiracy theorist or not, there was a big window and opportunity for fraud in the 2020 election. And I personally think that, everybody on January 6th were standing up for what they believed was a fraudulent election. And Steve, not just because he was there on January 6th and he's being charged with 4 misdemeanors, that they also had to perp walk him, put him in leg cuffs in court, and then they had to walk him with handcuffs to the car as if he was some flight risk. He turned himself in. They're doing this on purpose to send a message. And the saddest part is, I think Steve would agree, is that there's hundreds of other guys that are getting it even worse than Steve. So it's really a sad injustice what's going on in America. And I understand the outside appearance of January 6th might look bad because of what you saw on TV, but we must not forget that they were able to reconvene within 3 hours of January 6th and still certify the election. So it was not as bad as 9/11. And anybody that says that is very disingenuous, and you shouldn't believe them.
Well, no, anybody who says that is straight out crazy. It was a riot. I mean, there were people who behaved badly. A lot of people didn't. And when you see the extensive footage and you see some people being escorted by officers around the premises, and then some of those people face very serious charges, you do wonder what's happening when we had, the Summer of Love with the BLM riots, which we had more than a dozen killings. We had, I think, over 20 people were murdered. You had so many more bashed, so many just properties looted, trash, burnt. And then you look at the charges that followed compared to January 6th. I mean, you can understand why trust in the justice system in the US is at an all-time low. And on that, and on the lawfare, you could call it, against Trump, I saw today even Russian collusion hoaxer and left-wing activist Mark Elias, even he's admitted that Trump cannot get an impartial jury trial in Washington, D.C. And I had a look at the voting record in Washington, D.C., the heart of the swamp, and only 5% voted for Trump in 2020, up from 4% in 2016. So when you've got that sort of a jury pool who are very politically motivated folk, it's going to be hard to get a fair trial there.
Well, he doesn't have a chance to get a fair trial. You saw that Nikki Haley, who's the biggest representative of the deep state and the military-industrial complex, wants to send all these young children to go fight wars that just benefit, other countries that really don't, put America's values first. I mean, literally, Nikki Haley, I mean, what's going on right now to Donald Trump is the most ridiculous thing in the entire world, Rita. And it's just really a sad reality that we're going on, that we have a corrupt justice system, and it makes me absolutely sick that I can't do anything about it. And when you see Donald Trump and they have all these trumped up charges and he's the number one target, and Nikki Haley, her winning DC shows you that Trump has no chance, zero chance. He doesn't have a chance because these charges are basically out of thin air. I think in New York they're saying that he lied on a loan by overvaluing his properties. First of all, his properties are worth a ton. So it's just absolutely insane. And they're going to do anything they can to make him ineligible to run. So this is just the start. DC's not going to get a fair jury, but he wouldn't get a fair jury in Atlanta. He wouldn't get a fair jury anywhere, in my opinion.
Well, the New York case is possibly the most absurd of the lot, to say Mar-a-Lago's worth, what do they say, 16 million, 18 million, when a neighbouring property, which is tiny in comparison, sold for over 100 million. I mean, the whole thing is so absurd, but here we are. Now, on a lighter note, Alex, you have again been terrorising the Plano City Council. Let's just have a look.
I'm happy that you're talking to the City Council. I hear they're tremendous people, and I hear we're going to be bringing these shoes in. These are tremendous shoes. They're out of a Nikki Haley and an Escalade. You know what I'm talking about? We want to see the children. We want to see them wear the shoes and perform in the shoes and do a tremendous job in the shoes. Isn't that right? Isn't that correct?
Yes, President Trump, you making the shoes mandatory for all school uniforms in Plano School District would be great, and I think that would help the city. But I'm telling you, the mayor here is one of these woke mayors. He loves all the transgender stuff. As a matter of fact, he actually wants to put mandatory gender reassignment into the schools, state-sponsored.
Well, I think that's terrible. And, you know, the only person that I talk to who goes from man to woman, his name is Lindsey Graham. You know who I'm saying? He sits when he pees.
I'm scared you're going to end up in jail. And I've got to say, you almost had me. That's a very good Trump until he made the Lindsey Graham joke. But what are you up to? I mean, those counsellors did not look amused at all.
No, they hated it. And so today I actually interviewed Laura Trump, and we had Trump call in again. So you're going to love that clip. And that actually, I'll be honest, that's Sean Farash. That guy's the best Trump impersonator in the world. And the council, the only reason they didn't cancel me or cancel the interview is I think they actually believed it was Donald Trump. And everybody thinks it's AI, but that was a real Trump impersonator, Sean Farash. And I'm going to New York City on Friday, and I'm speaking at their city council, and they're going to get a call from Trump, Rita, like they've never heard before. You know, it's not the real Trump, but they're going to think it's the real Trump. So only you guys in Australia know this, and my audience, you know, the people that watch my show. So keep it a secret, Australia. But yeah, we're about to have Trump call the New York City Council on this Friday, and he's going to give them the business, really just lay it on thick, as we say here in America.
We're all complicit now. We're all party to this madness. We'll be quiet about it, and I'll bring you the video. Now, you also exposed the mayor of your hometown of Dallas for cheating on his wife with a city staffer. You confronted him at Dallas City Council. Let's have a look.
You're going through a terrible divorce, and your wife, Nikita, is accusing you of sleeping with your staffer, Mary Albana. And Mary Albana was your chief of staff, and then you went and paid her $100,000.
Again, I mean, that is, come on. That's going too far, isn't it?
Well,
how did he sorry, go ahead.
Let me just tell you this. He didn't react very kindly to me. You can see his reaction. He was very mad. But his wife, he's having a contentious divorce battle, and she was upset. This is all in the divorce. You know, this is the public record, that he divorced her the day that it was his race was uncontested, that he knew he was going to win the newest election, the newest cycle.
It's cold.
So he was using her as a political pawn in a way, and that she walked in on him, and that when she confronted him, he said he had cheated on her over 12 times, and she had Ring doorbell camera footage of him and the staffer. And what's so crazy about the story that makes it a big deal is that Mary Albana was his chief of staff for like 5 or 6 years. And when she left, she created a company called Adept Political Strategy. And he gave her 5 payments of $20,000, paid her over $100,000. So it's just very, you know, it looks very nefarious in my personal point of view.
Dodgy.
That his ex-staffer is giving all that money to.
It's dodgy. It's not the sort of shenanigans I'd expect to see in Dallas. Alex Stein, thank you so much for your time tonight. Appreciate it. And still to come, a Melbourne academic who has no time for the massive falsehoods pushed by the gender wage gap report. You're watching the Rita Panahi Show. Joining me now is economist Dr. Natalia Ilyushina. Now, last week we had a number of Australian businesses, including some in the media, who were rocked by a report from the Workplace Gender Equality Agency looking into the gender pay gap rates at some of the nation's top employers. But you say we should take these results with a grain of salt. That's what I've been arguing. There's a massive flaws in the data. Sky News, by the way, was the only media outlet where there was no gender wage gap. In fact, women were paid a little bit more than the men, so the only one. But tell me why you say this data is flawed.
Look, Rita, there was lots of discussion about the pay gap of the report, but not much attention was on the gender. And I'm, as an economist, I collect data myself, and recently there was a massive revolution, I would say evolution, of how we measure gender. So it's no longer, the answer options are no longer men and women or male, female, but there's male, female, other. And with the growing acceptance of fluidity of how we identify, I don't even know what's the gender pay gap, the gap between who and who.
So this data, does it measure men and women as far as biological men and women, or is it measuring women who may identify as men or vice versa? Is it about self-identification or is it actual biological reality?
The problem with that particular report and how they collected the data, the Gender Workplace Equality Agency didn't collect the actual data on gender themselves. They used what companies reported their employees are. And there's absolutely no consistency. They can be, in some companies, they might have 10 answer options to the gender question. In others, they could be just male, female. And another dimension to that is usually this sort of data on employees is collected at the point when you are being hired. So you report, I'm a woman or I'm a man or whatever else options are there. And that answer is now impacted a lot by the length of the employment. So with the example of Qantas, and that's what I'm worried about is happening, is this data, their gender data would have been collected for many employees many, many years ago. Because we know when Qantas people do work long time, they're quite loyal, especially the flight attendants. As opposed to newly established companies, it could be somebody who reported their gender last year and they could identify as women being biological men and vice versa.
But isn't the problem with the Qantas example that, yes, they have a massive gender wage gap, but you expect pilots to be earning more than flight attendants, and the flight attendants tend to be female and the pilots tend to be male. Now, you can look at the reasons behind that, but again, that's just a reality. So what's the... No, you're shaking your head.
It is a reality, but also, do you know what? In terms of Qantas, I almost feel like gender pay gap coefficient measured the freedom of choice rather than the actual gender pay gap. I just spoke to my friend who is a Qantas flight attendant, and she's a young girl. She dreamed about this flight attendant job, and I asked her, why don't you become a pilot? And she looked at me and she said, no way, I want to have a family, and it's huge responsibility that I do not want to take. And the whole rhetoric in this conversation was, I do not want.
Well, that's what I've long argued for in the most, what would you say, progressive countries, for want of a better word, in the countries where women have equal rights and are most empowered. They have the freedom to pick the industries that they want to work in. So if they prefer education, for example, to engineering, they should not be punished for that as far as being pressured to go into a field they're not interested in. But, of course, education is probably going to pay less than engineering.
You know what the example in history when people were not supposed to choose their occupation or mode of employment or whether they're allowed to...
You know where this doesn't exist? in a country like Iran. Like Iran actually has way more women as a percentage in the STEM fields. But really, do we want to emulate Iran? Is that what we're asking?
Well, if we want to tell people what to do for work, and as there was pointed out on one of the interviews that we should encourage women to be pilots and engineers, that stinks of communism and Soviet Union when it was illegal to work and government planned economy was directing where you're supposed to work and which location. They could send you to Siberia to do your job.
Don't give them ideas, Natalia. Now, today we learned that health insurance premiums are going up further. Almost 15 million private health insurance customers will experience an increase in their premiums from April 1. That's according to the health minister who got the announcement today. But some of those are going up more than others. NIB, for example, is jumping 4.1%, Medibank 3.3%, Bupa 3.61%. We've already got people dropping out of private health insurance, Natalia, because they cannot afford it. We've had dozen interest rate increases. This isn't going to help matters.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The private health insurance is one of the first thing people drop when the cost of living pressure is looming because it falls under the discretionary expenses. That's something you can live without. We're not talking about long-term consequences and long-term adverse health outcomes. But also, interestingly, when this whole rhetoric about supermarket prices was, and I did check by industry where the largest increase in prices was, it's finance and insurance.
Absolutely. And it's not a small amount. It's not like a carton of eggs going up 5%. It is significant amount.
And I don't understand why.
Well, Well, I've got some reasons, but we don't have time to delve into there. Dr. Natalia Ilyushina, thank you so much for coming in tonight. Do appreciate it. That's it from me tonight. I'll be back with you at 11 tomorrow night, but don't go anywhere. Newsnight is up next. Good night.